Hello everyone, I want to talk about a very controversial and delicate subject going on in America today, and of course that's the subject of abortion. And I want to mainly be talking to Christians because I believe in a lot of ways we've really mishandled this subject when we're dealing with the mainstream media and dealing with how we should really approach this subject. And the reason I say that is because, look at it logically. You wouldn't expect a non-Christian to hold our same core values and morals and beliefs because they're not a Christian, right? It's illogical to expect somebody who doesn't hold our belief systems to adhere to our beliefs on abortion. It doesn't make any sense at all to me. And so it's not logical to beat people over the head and say, well, God says abortion is murder. They don't hold to the same God that we hold to. They don't hold to the same belief systems that we hold to. So that's not a logical argument, and it just makes us look like a bunch of religious wackos. It just makes us look like a bunch of religious zealots, and of course they're going to reject our views on abortion. And so we have to learn a new way. We have to learn a different way of approaching this when it comes to the mainstream media and approaching it when it becomes to reaching people on this topic that don't hold our beliefs. And let's face it, if you're really honest, you know that the Bible doesn't tell us when a person actually becomes a person. It doesn't tell us that. And I know you want to quote Psalms 139, where David says, God knit me in my mother's womb. Well, yes, it says that very clearly. God knit him together in his mother's womb. That's where he was being formed. And we already know that. We know that the womb is where a child is formed. There's no doubt about that. We know as a scientific fact that life begins at the moment of conception. That's when life begins. That doesn't tell us when personhood begins. And that's really what we're trying to get at. And we want to be sensitive to women. We have to be sensitive to women and women's rights. If we're not sensitive to their stand on the matter, then of course they're going to ignore anything we have to say. And let's face it, women should have rights over their body. But where should that right end? Well, let's look at it this way. Suppose some people are out hiking. They came to a very deep ravine, and there's this rickety old rope bridge, and they have to cross this rope bridge. And so somebody picks up a small child, and this woman is carrying this small child on her back, and it's very burdensome. And she gets out over the ravine, and she just, it doesn't feel comfortable to her anymore. She doesn't want to carry this load anymore. She just wants to throw this child off. Should she have the right? Does she have the right over her body to toss this child to his death in the ravine? Well, of course not. Nobody would dispute that this child should be thrown to its death, but that's not what women are saying. They're saying, well, it's not a person yet, so there's nothing wrong with me having an abortion, and that's true. If it's not a person, there shouldn't be anything wrong with aborting just a non-person. It should be no different than having a mole removed if it's not a person. And really, there's nowhere in Scripture that tells us when personhood begins. But here's the problem. There's nowhere in science where we can point to and say this is when a person begins. There's no way scientifically to say a person begins at this point or stage. And we have these different definitions. Well, the definition of person is da 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 da, and we read that off. Well, the problem with using definitions is definitions change with societies, and It's an illogical way of deciding personhood. I mean, we all know Hitler had a very different view of personhood than you and I do, because Hitler used his definition to justify the slaughter of over 6 million Jews. So personhood shouldn't depend on our willy-nilly ideas or definitions, right? Well, what about the fact that we've always considered a person the moment it comes out of the womb? Well, that sounds logical, but why should moving down the birth canal to a different location make you a person when moments before you were just in a different location? That doesn't make any sense. If I was in a car accident and I was put into a coma and they put me in a hospital on life support and I'm dependent on this machine to keep me alive, am I no longer a person simply because I've moved into a hospital room? Location shouldn't change who or what I am, and neither should just moving down the birth canal in just a matter of a few minutes change who you are. If you're a person, you're a person. What about level of development? Maybe, because it's so small, so tiny. Well, should size really matter? I mean, we see little people today, and there's no doubt they're persons. They're just as much a person as you and me. Development doesn't matter. A child is still in development, even outside the womb, and that's still a person. So level of development doesn't make any sense. What about brain capacity? Somebody said, what about their capacity to think? Well, again, if you go back to me being in a coma, I don't have any ability to think, but we understand that I am likely to come out of that coma and have the ability to think again, right? So the temporary ability not to think isn't a good enough reason to deny someone their personhood, right? The temporary ability for a fetus that we know is developing into a full-grown human being is not a good and logical reason to exclude them from personhood. It doesn't make any logical sense. So science really can't tell us. We can't look anywhere in science. There's no scientific discovery that says this is when a person actually begins. We know that life begins at the moment of conception. We know that that's when the process starts. That's when the human process starts, at the moment the conception takes place. But from that moment on, from then until birth, we don't know when a person becomes a person. And so, how should we really think of this? Well, let's look at this little story for a second. I heard a story about a police officer that was dispatched to the scene of a bank robbery in progress, and he arrived at the scene, and the moment he got there, a bank robber bolted out the door and started taking shots at the officer, and the officer took cover, and then he followed the guy in foot pursuit, and he followed the guy, and the guy ran up into a construction site area, and he hid behind one of those porta potties, and he's blasting away at the officer, and then he ducks back behind the porta potty. Well, the officer stops and he thinks, now that porta potty is only plastic. It's just, he says, my rounds will go right through that and I could take this guy out. Well, the moral question is, should he take that shot? Should he? Of course not, because that officer doesn't know if there's an innocent person inside that porta potty, does he? He doesn't know if there's an innocent person hiding for his life inside there. So that officer is trained and should only take the shot when that person that he's after is in clear view, right? And that's the way we train officers to err on the side of safety. And I mean, I could give you millions of examples that we do in society today where when in areas where we're unsure, we always err on the side of safety. I mean, let's face it, the very speed limit that we obey on the highway is an error on the side of safety. I mean, there are plenty of people that are very skilled at driving and can drive an automobile at high rates of speed very safely. But we have to set the speed limit on an error on the side of safety and set it at a reasonable limit where a brand new driver can also handle the same speeds, and it has to be uniform for everybody. So we err on the side of safety. We set the speed limit at 70, 75, or whatever the case may be for that particular area. But it's an error on the side of safety. So in those areas where we always err on the side of safety, then why wouldn't we think the same way when it comes to not knowing when personhood begins? Why shouldn't we err on the side of safety and ban abortions in a situation where we just don't know? We don't know if we're taking a person's life or not. We don't know if that is a person. So we should err on the side of safety. Let's go back to this woman on the ravine, on the rope ladder with this child on her back. We know she shouldn't have the right, or a woman's right should end at the dividing line to another person's rights. So, but what about in a situation where they've stumbled, the child is about to fall over, the weight of the child is pulling the woman over, and she's hanging on just by a thread, about to fall. In that situation, where the only hope of the woman's survival is to sadly cut the ropes, holding this child to her back. In a situation where that occurs, then yeah, it should be okay to cut that rope. It should be okay when a woman's life is in jeopardy of the child that she's carrying. She should have the right to abort that child. But only if it's a clear case where the woman's life is in imminent jeopardy. Thank you for watching. Let me know your thoughts, and like this video if you like it, and subscribe if you like. Have a great day, and God bless you.